had intended to do something else this weekend, or the last weekend, I guess, that I ultimately didn't get around to with all the Oscar stuff, but I did decide to go ahead and go in this direction since we have A Wrinkle in Time coming this weekend. I thought, why not just stick with the Witherspoon thing? So even though we're going in the same direction in regards to a Witherspoon thing, we're going in completely opposite Witherspoon directions, for sure. With these two movies about, obviously, overachievers in their own different ways in high school, and also just happen to feature possibly scenes where each one has a married guy who decides to start having an affair, or gets the idea to start having an affair, which ultimately gives him a run-in with bees. So, my brother actually suggested this one a long while back, and I forgot about it, but then thankfully it had occurred to me again this past weekend, so I figure we'll do this. It's also obviously very early in two now very extremely praised directors. Well, one had a bit of a misstep this past year, obviously, but surely he'll come back. Obviously, we got Alexander Payne doing Election, and we've got Wes Anderson doing Rushmore. I also want to say each of these was their second movie, at least feature-length, with Election following up Citizen Ruth and Rushmore following up Bottle Rocket. I'm pretty positive with Anderson. I'm not totally sure on Payne, but I think that's about right. So, let's go into these two very warped and twisted in a hilarious fashion. Yeah. So, start with, I will say that it's kind of an intriguing setup from the get-go if you know what you're in for. It's like, if you know it's this really twisted R-rated movie, then you know you're in for something, especially when you've got Matthew Broderick going as far away from Ferris Bueller as possible, to the point that he's basically doing the exact opposite in this case. And we've got Reese Witherspoon playing, who eventually became, like, a character who became synonymous with the real-life overachiever. And it's a story that's told in, like, even though, you know, Payne's style is certainly apparent, every time I watch Election, I get serious John Waters vibes. Like, I feel like if we had seen this movie under the direction of John Waters, it would not be much different at all. And I kind of love that. So, the thing here is, to start off with, it's the thing that really makes the movie interesting, just completely, immediately, like, right out of the gate, is this whole multiple perspective thing, and all the voiceover we get through the whole thing. Like, I love, first of all, that the voiceover is consistent. It's not something that just kind of comes and goes. And one of the main things that makes that interesting is the fact that you could very easily imagine this movie, and it would come off much more average than it is if it were to do this, which is basically make it a regular high school movie seen through the perspective of mainly the students, with Broderick kind of being a supporting player. But the way we do this, the way we have each perspective, not just so we see the story from their perspective, but we see other characters through their eyes, and we get to do this with, like, all of the major characters because of this. And you might think for a while there that they kind of, like, almost might be overdoing it, like they're kind of getting away from themselves when we go to, we really establish something here with McAllister and Tracy, and kind of this back and forth thing, but then we introduce Paul, Chris Klein, after his skiing accident, and then we start to see the whole thing through his perspective, and you're like, oh, okay, because we know how he's going to figure into this. But then we branch off again with his sister Tammy and her lesbian experience, which may or may not somehow bring her right back into this, and we've got like a four-person story here. Because by the time it branches off into Tammy, and it's like your first viewing, you probably think, where the hell are we? But it all comes back around, and it's all this one great big thing. And it's very, very crucial that we see things from all four of their perspectives for everything to tie together the way that it does. And so, going on that, but there's the thing, too, about the perspective thing, which is really interesting, is the way, even when we set it up, and even when we feel like we have a whole giant picture, because we've seen each character from their own perspective and through other people's perspectives, so it's like we should know everything at this point. but not really. Because obviously, you know, through your own mind, there's a good chance you're going to justify whatever it is you might be doing, and through your voice might make it sound better. So when these are established, we've got Tracy, who's just, you know, really determined and just diligent, but then there's this side story with her and the teacher, and these scenes where she's in his house, and it's just this really creepy, disgusting, predatory thing. And we see her as like this innocent that's being taken advantage of. And then we have Broderick's perspective, where everything is like, everything has like a moral compass here, and he's saying like, oh, we can't do this or we can't do that because, you know, morals. And then when we come down the line through the movie, we realize that that's basically the opposite of what both of these characters are, even though both perspectives tell us this at the beginning. We learn so much about them through their actions, regardless of the fact that we're actually seeing the actions through their eyes. There is still stuff about these characters, we just have no idea quite what they're capable of. And I really like that they build up what exactly the big thing is, the big event that went down, because obviously we're of course talking about the whole he takes two of Tracy's votes and throws them away to help Paul win, but the thing here is that if you were told that at the beginning, like if it started with us knowing what the big event was, it would be like, alright, where it's like Jim's actual line, we're not electing the fucking Pope for God's sake. So it's like, but the fact that they build it up to that, when that moment does come, it does, and we've had so much build up, and we've seen the path that Jim especially has gone through to get up to this point, to make him make this decision. It seems like so insanely dramatic, and like the ultimate tipping point for all the shit that's happened to him all the way up to this point. So I really love the way they played that off, and kind of, even though we kind of probably have a vague idea of what the big thing is, still the fact that they just kind of didn't quite tell us what that was until that point, I think makes all the difference in the payoff. So, and yeah, and it's also kind of throws wrenches into things when you look at these other characters they introduced, particularly Paul, because you've got this horrible war going on between McAllister and Tracy that I don't know that both of them realize they're in it for a while. Like, they don't realize just how much contempt there is for the other until the movie keeps going. And at the center of this, we have the very innocent Paul, where it's, the thing that Klein is really able to do well here is how he's got such, once again, he's got such this innocence about him, like even more so than the facade innocence that Tracy has, because his is so genuine. Like, starting with just the way he says his lines so joyfully, no matter what the context, and it's sad to watch, like, people just walk all over him all the time, even though he's, like, this big jock. See the first scene when, he walks in on Tammy and Lisa, and she says, "Don't you fucking knock," and his response is, "Yeah," and then, because he did. And then it's like he's just oblivious to anything negative. And it makes him a really interesting character to watch in this particular world that is just like this cesspool of negativity and hatred and betrayal and lies and just all this other stuff, despite this very innocent looking backdrop of electing the high school president. And there is, like I said, his narration also, just deliveries like, you can't imagine how surprised I was when Lisa asked me for a ride home and ended up blowing me. And just like everything rolls off his back. Like everything is just, well, this is what this is. I guess we have to roll with it now. And it always comes back to his football obsession. The endearing scene when he has to give his speech, and it's just like a whole... He starts off fine, but then his sentences start to run together, and they're like really awkwardly spaced. And so that's the thing here. But interestingly enough, it's like particularly with what Witherspoon does, which is why I love her in this so much, is that she's clearly, I mean, we might as well just like cut out a few middle sentences here. We'll just jump straight to, she's kind of a psychopath. So the thing about this is that even though they build this up, and even though we see kind of how vindictive she is, there are still occasions where we sympathize with her, and that we realize, even though she goes to lengths, it's not like she's literally cutting throats. She's like tearing posters down and lying about it. But even so, we can also see it from Jim's perspective, where it's like, this is like symptom behavior. It's like, what's she gonna do when she's out in the real world? She's gonna do other worse things to her advantage, because that's how she got through high school and became the president and all that. So, but even so, there are some scenes like when she has to fix the poster she put up, and she slips on the trash can and tears it in half. And when she's just sitting there after this happens, yeah, we actually feel bad for her, even though at this point we've pretty much come to realize how unhinged she actually is. But then, of course, this leads to these, like I said, moments of like psychosis when they actually bring in the Navajo Joe music that would later, the Ennio Morricone music that would later be used in Kill Bill to a very similar effect. It's very interesting. Like, I know it was all about Navajo Joe and Morricone and all that, but I can't help but wonder if it was also somewhat in the back of Tarantino's head, the use of it in Election as well. So that kind of serves its purpose perfectly as well. And we also, and yeah, obviously she'll get like overly pretentious, but in an amusing way, like the way, just little things, like when she says, she's looking at Tammy's petition, and she says that these names are illegible, but instead of illegible, she pronounces it illegible, and it's and it's just, that's just what she does. And it all just really does work for this character, and once again, going in all these different directions with all these different perspectives, it never loses its flow. And it's like, this is one of like the quickest hour 40-something minute movies you can watch, I would think. And somehow, in the midst of all this, they managed to fit in Matthew Broderick's sex life, and somehow make it totally relevant. Because the thing here is that there's actually, well, there's the whole, we know that there's going to be just those little things in his life that are just kind of slowly and slowly pushing him towards an edge. And it's like, regardless of whatever he does, whatever choices he makes, we will have seen this progression to get to this point. So we, like, understand where his character's coming from the whole time. But then there are some moments, like the first time we see him in bed with his wife, and she's face down. And they're attempting to make a child, obviously, and he starts to imagine his best friend's wife, which obviously comes into play. But then, something that they rarely address I don't know if it's just supposed to be, like, kind of there underlying the whole time. Maybe it's where, like, somehow we're in some sick, twisted way where the hatred stems from. That he gets off imagining that it's Tracy as well. And this sex might turn to violent, angry sex because of this. Yet also, something he's very... It's weird. It's really weird. And I love that they still added that stuff in, where it's like his wife's doing the fuck me thing, and then he starts imagining that it's Tracy doing the fuck me thing, but they add in this thing right before the scene ends, where we hear Tracy's voice, because we've cut back to Broderick at this point, so we're hearing her voice while her face is off camera. And what we hear is, fuck me, please? And it's like that kind of innocent facade that she has came out even in his fantasy. This is the kind of movie we got. And it's, like I said, it's just gloriously fucked up, is what it is. And just really takes this kind of biting, darkly comedic angle that just kind of comes so unexpectedly from a movie with this kind of, setup. So, on top of all that, there's also, there's, obviously with it being funny, and obviously not, it doesn't necessarily just have to be darkly funny. There are moments like, the bee sting. Like, the bee sting is just like this one-off thing. But the thing is it's so hilariously shows off, just how shit his luck is, and how it, like, leaves this kind of, it's this one comedic moment that lasts through the rest of the movie as, like, this stamp of just, this is what this guy goes through, and it's only going to get worse, and once again, ultimately push him over an edge that makes one small choice turn into something that makes everybody in the movie go different directions, like for the rest of their lives. um, and that is, and they also throw in those little details, like when they look at the ballots after Tammy's been disqualified over the poster thing, and you see the detail that like some poor soul had to go through every ballot and mark off Tammy's name. um, so just things like that. But then there's also, you know, some side characters that stick out. Like, I love, I think Phil Reeves is the actor's name that plays the principal. Is really good, and he's also kind of one of those ones that has, like, one side where it's like he's very much like a principal. Then by the time we're getting closer to the end and things are getting more out of control, he's just, like, he gets into I don't give a fuck anymore territory. And a character that always makes me laugh when I think about him is Larry Fouch, who I don't think we meet, at least up close, until the end, when the votes are being counted. And there's something so strange about Larry Fouch, because we think that Tracy Flick is obsessed with this stuff, yet for some reason, I don't think we ever learn, Larry Fouch takes this stuff really, really seriously. And it's like, I almost want background on him. Like, I want to know what he goes home to. I want to know why this means so much to him. But at the same time, the fact that it just seems so random that a character is this passionate about it and we don't really know why or any background on him just makes it so much funnier. So, yes, this is definitely... I don't know that it's a movie that, like, completely works for a lot of people its first time around. It's one of those movies where the more times I saw it, the more it was like everything just clicks so well. And I was just able to enjoy more and more just how... I can't express this enough, just how twisted and fucked up the whole thing is. And how it manages to go in those really dark directions without going too over the top, which is really important. Like, this could have gone, like, way off the rails. But they keep it just grounded enough, but still keep it messed up enough that it all does still fit in together. And everything about the epilogue is great, too. And I love how the characters just, all in all, we go through all of this, and pretty much more or less the characters never change, which is which is the most amazing thing. So, yes, this might honestly be... I really love The Descendants a lot. I know, like, not many people say that, but I really do. But even with that, this might be my favorite Alexander Payne movie over Sideways. Like I said, I know he's... in Nebraska. I know he's hit a bump with downsizing for sure, but hopefully he comes back in a big way next time, because looking at movies like this, it's like there's just, yes, just absolute perfection. So let's go on to Wes Anderson now with Rushmore, where I had, this was a movie that, weirdly enough, it's interesting that Wes Anderson has such a prestige factor now. I mean, he kind of did in the indie scene, starting with when Bottle Rocket took off, but still, the first few times I saw this movie was on Comedy Central, when they play it, like, you know, around Revenge of the Nerds or something, and it was like... so back then, it was kind of hard to register just how different this was from, like, different types of comedies like this, especially with this setting. And obviously, I had already seen the Royal Tenenbaums. I kind of got introduced to Wes Anderson in reverse. I saw the Royal Tenenbaums when I was like 11 when it came out in theaters. Then I saw Rushmore, then I saw Bottle Rocket, and then forward. And once I kind of really got a grasp on him, because the Royal Tenenbaums at the time was not what, we'll say, people in my area expected. When they saw a movie with Ben Stiller and Owen Wilson, people weren't quite... like, it was the first kind of mainstream Wes Anderson movie, I think. So I did kind of have a clue as to what vibe to expect from Rushmore, but I still wasn't quite sure. And you look at it, and the interesting thing here is you kind of expect a Tracy Flick-type character from Jason Schwartzman. It's, well, Rushmore came just a little bit first. Rushmore was, like, December 1998, and then Election was a little after in 99. Because he's not exactly... he's an overachiever, but not in, like, every respect like you expect from these characters. To where it's the whole... in the extracurricular activities, he's just insane. But everything else in his schoolwork, he's just failing miserably. He gets like a 37 on a geography test. And the interesting about this first also is Schwartzman's casting. This was his very first movie, weirdly enough. We immediately saw just how funny and talented he could be going into it, and kind of play these. Like, I don't feel like he's completely typecast throughout his career, but he is very good at playing one particular type of character in regards to being like. There's like the nerdy type, but he can also be really funny, and there's like just a slight hinge of being, a bit off his rocker. So, and which he just shows off in the best possible way here. But knowing that he seemed to be so far down on the casting decisions, because I had heard that he wanted Noah Taylor at one point, who you probably know from, like, he was the scientist guy in Edge of Tomorrow, he was young Jeffrey Rush in Shine, he was Charlie's dad in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But another one I had heard was that he was supposed to be Macaulay Culkin, which is kind of perfect. Apparently the only reason he didn't do it was because of, he was like in some retirement phase or something. But has since said that he would definitely do a Wes Anderson movie if he was asked today. And every time that kind of ruined it, because every time I watch this movie now, it's impossible to not imagine Macaulay Culkin in this part, because I think it would have been like an extension of Richie Rich a little bit, at least that character, or the way he played that character, I suppose. Even if he was kind of in his I don't give a fuck about acting anymore phase by then. But, yes, so, and he definitely kind of, I imagine, could have been able to bring, like, the kind of dark aspects to it. Something I'd just really love to see that, unfortunately, we won't. And it does make you wonder about this character when you learn that, obviously, like most of Wes Anderson's movies, it's co-scripted by him and Owen Wilson. And supposedly this seems to stem from the fact that Owen Wilson himself was expelled from a prep school when he was about the age of Max Fisher. So it's like, so Max Fisher is kind of this detestable character. But it's like, I wonder what perspective they're coming from in regards to, because it's kind of ambiguous how we're supposed to view Max in this movie. By the end, it seems like we have a happy ending, like everybody, gets more or less what they want, or at least as much as they can, but there's still something about this movie that doesn't quite capture that kind of dark undertone in the way that Election does. And its lines are a little more blurred, but then again, it's kind of hard to tell when you watch it, because the characters kind of walk these lines, how much of this is intentional or not. Because he obviously wanted to, he had mentioned something about wanting to do like a Roald Dahl kind of inspiration thing, which is interesting, which obviously we would later see in The Fantastic Mr. Fox. But then there's also a clear, like almost a distractingly clear homages to The Graduate. Like the whole plot being that he's interested in Olivia Williams, a much older woman than him, a child practically. And then there's the scene when Murray jumps into the pool and sits at the bottom, and it's like, that just really rams it home. It's like, yes, you've made it very clear this is supposed to kind of somewhat be The Graduate a little bit. But while we mention Murray, we will talk about how he's like a major high point in this movie. I wish he had a little bit more screen time than he does, but the thing is we've all heard that story where Bill Murray got the script for, and obviously he can be a bit picky sometimes, especially being like his own agent and everything. And apparently when he got the script for Rushmore, he loved it so much that he said he would do it for free. And the funny thing is that you read into it and it's like, Bill Murray doesn't really seem to care much for scripts. Because he was, like, there was that rumor about him, like, actually putting a Ghostbusters script through the shredder. Then there's the whole thing about how anytime you see Bill Murray in a movie, he's almost always going off script. Like, he reads a script, he gets the general idea, then he throws it out and makes his own shit up and just kind of follows the plot. But here you can really tell how much he's invested with what was actually on the page. I guess I was reading that he, it's so endearing to read up on it, too, especially when you hear how Bill Murray has interacted with people in the past on some sets, and it's like, he has such a very grand respect for Anderson himself. Like, he was, like, really keen on taking his direction, like, drawing attention to his talent, there was they needed like a helicopter shot, and Touchstone wouldn't give them the money for it, so Bill Murray gave him a blank check and said, "Do what you need to with this." I guess he like helped like with equipment, like setting up shots and shit. So he was like really into the making of this, and that really speaks volumes for somebody like Bill Murray, who really just wants to kind of take the reins himself and just go on his own path and hopes that people can catch up to him. He was like so on Wes Anderson's wagon here and just letting him do his thing, and we've seen that through almost every movie Wes Anderson has done has had Murray in it. And also, there's the thing about there are scenes where you kind of sense he's probably doing some improv. Like there was also, I guess he apparently legitimately didn't care for the kids playing his kids. So like the scenes where they're like roughhousing, like when he reaches in the back seat and like hits one of them, may or may not just have been Bill Murray being Bill Murray to those actors. But then there's also stuff like when they're in the elevator and he lights the two cigarettes, or when he's walking through towards the end and the band's there and he just like starts screaming "scatter" so they get out of his way, and it's like that kind of stuff feels like it was improv. If it wasn't improv, that's impressive because it just feels so natural and like something he would just do on the spot like that. And the way he's kind of somewhat playing this man-child type character. Like Olivia Williams has that line towards the end when she says to Max, like, you know, you and Herman deserve each other, you're both just little children. And he plays that angle really well as well, despite being this, you know, I almost said cement, but that was election. This businessman of sorts in construction. So, and obviously you're going to have these weird yet extremely endearing Wes Anderson touches, like the, just the absurdity of the school play being a very elaborate production of Serpico, of all things. Not to mention what we see later on down the road, where we got the play that's inspired by, like, it's like half Top Gun, half Apocalypse Now, and it's, it's just this whole thing. Classic war movies and all that. But towards the middle of the movie, it does kind of try to start to take on, like, a plot. And it's still kind of hard to tell if this is the movie's weakness, or if it starts to gain steam and then just loses its way, because, I mean, Wes Anderson is one of those directors to where it's like, writers and directors, to where it's like, he doesn't really necessarily need a plot, though it can work wonders. I thought having a plot worked wonders for The Grand Budapest Hotel, and Moonrise Kingdom more or less also, but there's just also a lot of focus on his vision and the weird array of characters, and just kind of bringing in these, it seems like this very weird fictional storybook world, yet the characters are so human inside them, in cases like this, or the Royal Tenenbaums. Or they can be. But then we get this whole plot where they both fall for Olivia Williams, who by the way I haven't mentioned is fantastic. Probably one of her best performances, actually, and she's got a ton of those. And especially the ghostwriter. But here she's very good and very easily plays off the... We can easily buy that characters would just be attracted to her like this, to the point that they go to war with each other over it. Yeah, another kind of similarity with election is this, the older figure and the, you know, the student going after each other in an all-out war. In this particular case, this one's a little more dangerous, this war. But I love the, there's the way they use Mason Gamble, who played Dennis the Menace 5 years prior to this, who's also very good, who's kind of caught in the middle of this. And kind of is the one that sets this war off. He's kind of like Bryony in Atonement here. And because it all starts with his mom, Connie Nielsen, who everybody also kind of flocks to. Everybody's so fucking horny in this movie. They just flock to Connie Nielsen or Olivia Williams, whoever happens to be there, and wars will start within. And then I love the escalation of this, because it does kind of just start off with a bunch of false rumors being spread about hand jobs. It's one of those, I don't even know how many times this movie says the word hand job, but it's a lot. But then it just escalates so quickly, so suddenly, in a hilarious way, when it starts with, like, you know, this and happens, then Murray says, you know, oh, I'm gonna crush his bike under my car and then put it back. And then Max's response to that is to cut his brakes, to which he gets arrested. And it's kind of this hilarious thing where it just gets so out of control, so out of fast, that it just kind of stops abruptly. To where it's like, him getting arrested is kind of somewhat the truce after a while. Or it comes shortly after. Or that scene at his mom's grave is kind of nice, where we do kind of start to see, everything kind of starts to even itself out again. If there's one problem this movie has, it actually comes to a great conclusion about an hour and 12 minutes in. Like, it feels like we've reached a conclusion when there's 20 minutes left. But once we see where it goes and the directions it goes, it doesn't feel necessarily dragged out or anything, but it does feel like that would have been an interesting closing point. And as we go into this plot, we start to realize that this could almost, once again, it could potentially go off the rails like Election, was in danger of, but ultimately did not do, to where Rushmore gets a lot closer than Election in regards to almost going into flat-out thriller territory. Like that line with, when he approaches Olivia Williams after all the shit's gone down, and his line is, Rushmore was my life, now you are. And it's like, oh, okay, this is... and it does kind of... And we also kind of get that vibe, I don't feel like we get enough of his rivalry with Brian Cox. I feel like there also could have been a lot of juice in that, too, and an actor like Brian Cox definitely could have been used a lot more. The scene in the hospital bed when he wakes up and just identifies him immediately when they think he's not all there. We should have had a lot more interaction with them. And that one particular scene between them, ends way too early, so... Or it gets to its closing way too early, but... Yeah. The thing about it, though, is that honestly, Rushmore's biggest problem is something that I guess it can't really help, and eventually comes out to being a compliment to Anderson, and that is... Rushmore seemed, to me, in my eyes, when I go back and watch it, has kind of become a victim of the later portions of Anderson's filmography. Because when Rushmore was just kind of by itself, or was in, like, the first three there, his first three movies, you could get this vibe of, like, it felt, like, really unique. It felt like this dude's own style. It's like, it did feel a lot like Bottle Rocket, and we'd get that feeling some more when we got Tenenbaums. But then he has, like, gotten so more, I guess, precise and even better than he is with, the Grand Budapest Hotel and all that. His movies are just getting better as they go now. And it's kind of like, when you look back at Rushmore now, it almost feels a bit too minor. And you can definitely see, the foundation for which he would jump off of, and it's all apparent here, and it's great. His inspirations are a bit more obvious, and it's not quite as much his own as his later movies would be. That's another problem. But, yeah, it just feels like that precision that you, and everything else, and that attention to detail that you just love from his movies, where it feels like every single tiny little detail was thought out to everything. This is all kind of, I'm just saying the same thing like 3 times in a row in different words, but you get what I mean. And you don't quite see that as much here, and it's almost like it lessens the impact now, that we know that's what he would become capable of, and this, I'm just not as drawn to Rushmore as I used to be. That also could be age, I don't know. But I do still get enjoyment out of it. There's obviously those charmingly odd touches, like, Murray taking the tiny branch off the tree and the whole thing falls over, and it's, yeah, there's definitely a lot of those little touches in there, but it's just, like, in comparison to what he's done now, like I said, which is totally unfair, because it's, like, to get to that point is only to compliment him, because this was still something truly great at the time, but then it just kind of seems to shrink in comparison when you see to what he can do now, and it's kind of he's become a victim of himself, basically, and when you look back at his old stuff, so... I haven't rewatched Tenenbaums in a while. I might need to do that to see where that lies, which should be fun. So I might do that like right before Isle of Dogs comes out or something. So yeah. So obviously I'd go for Election. Like I said, Election deals with the dark territory a lot more. It feels more maybe there's some ambiguity in Rushmore that's intentional in regards to just where exactly the tones are, but it just doesn't quite come through. It doesn't feel as like, it doesn't feel entirely intentional. It does feel a bit like its tones are a little kind of back and forth. Where Election, like I said, just feels consistent all the way through with everything it's doing. It just really embraces the sickness of it and just takes off with it. And uses it to its fullest advantage, like I said, most importantly, without going too far with it. So, yes, that's what I would go with. Next week, I guess you might pause. I'm thinking, like, maybe we'll do the one I was going to do last week on top of the Tomb Raider one. And then that Bond video, which you'll probably get the week after, and then, yeah, and then stuff like A Wrinkle in Time and Gringo, and, The Strangers, the new Tomb Raider, all that stuff in the next couple of weeks. So, The Outsider, that Netflix movie with Jared Leto, I guess we'll see what that's about. And then, yeah, that's probably what most of this month looks like, if anybody cares. So, we'll go ahead and end this here. So, until all that stuff, that's it.